They called us extremists for quoting the Constitution. Pam Bondi's words hit like a gunshot through the studio silence. Across from her, the CNN host's smug smile faltered, just for a second. But that second was all it took. Everyone watching at home felt it. Something had shifted. This wasn't going to be another scripted political debate. This was a reckoning. Pam Bondi sat poised, her voice low and steady. Not angry, not performative, just unmistakably certain. To her right, Karoline Leavitt waited, composed, her hands folded on her lap. She hadn't spoken yet, but her silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. The host leaned forward again, eyebrows lifted, voice dripping with sarcasm. So what exactly does patriotism mean to you two? Refusing to accept election results, quoting Bible verses at Senate hearings. The trap had been set. They were expected to fumble, to raise their voices, to lose control. But instead, Pam simply turned slightly, met the host's gaze and said, "Patriotism means protecting a system even when it no longer protects you." And at that moment, Karoline slowly looked up, the air tightened, and the real conversation was about to begin. Karoline Leavitt didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I took an oath at 23 years old," she began, calm but piercing, "to defend the Constitution, not to rewrite it, not to reinterpret it for political convenience, but to protect it as it was written." The host leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "And yet, you're sitting here defending people who stormed the Capitol." Karoline didn't blink. "No," she said, "I'm sitting here defending people who feel like their voices no longer matter. You mock them, you label them, but have you ever listened to them?" There was a pause. Not long, but long enough for the tension to settle in the room like static. Pam turned slightly, not to interrupt, but to give Karoline the floor. She knew what was coming. Karoline's voice stayed level. "I've met the mothers who lost sons in Afghanistan while Washington argued over pronouns. I've spoken to veterans who sleep in cars while Congress debates sending billions overseas. And every time we speak up, people like you," she glanced at the host, "call it dangerous." The host tried to interject, but Karoline held firm. "You don't get to redefine patriotism to fit your ratings." The room had gone so quiet that the soft hum of the studio equipment could be heard. Producers in the control room leaned closer to the monitors. This wasn't going as planned, and yet it was going exactly as it needed to. The host shifted in his chair, clearly trying to recalibrate. His usual playbook, fluster the guest, steer the narrative, keep control, was slipping. Karoline wasn't flinching. And Pam Bondi? She hadn't even spoken yet. She was watching, calculating. "Well, that's a compelling speech," the host said, forcing a smirk. "But aren't you glossing over the facts? We have court rulings, investigations." Karoline leaned forward slightly, her voice sharper now. "And how many of those court rulings were based on actual evidence versus political expediency? Let me ask you something. Do you know what it feels like to watch your government call you a threat for daring to ask a question?" The host didn't answer. Karoline didn't wait for one. "We're not here to defend lawlessness," she continued. "We're here because millions of Americans are being told to sit down and shut up, that their values are outdated, that their questions are dangerous. You can't silence that with a headline." Pam finally spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to shift the energy again. "She's right," Pam said, turning to the camera. "We both worked inside the system. We know what it's capable of, and we know when it's being weaponized." A murmur ran through the crew behind the scenes. This wasn't the interview they'd expected. It wasn't damage control, it was an indictment, and it was just beginning. The host took a deep breath, trying to reassert his footing. He glanced down at his notes, hoping to redirect. "Let's talk about the ethics complaint filed last year. Surely, Ms. Leavitt, you can't deny the seriousness of those allegations." But before he could finish, Pam interrupted, calmly, deliberately. "Which part exactly? The one that was dismissed within 2 weeks? Or the one that was leaked before it was even reviewed?" Her voice was smooth, but every word hit like a scalpel. The host blinked. "The public has a right to know—" "And they do," Karoline cut in. "But what they're being fed isn't the truth. It's manufactured outrage designed to distract from real abuse by officials who've never been held accountable a single day in their lives." Pam opened her binder, not pages of talking points, but documented evidence. She placed one sheet on the table, turning it toward the camera. This is a sworn affidavit from a federal staffer detailing how the initial complaint was drafted by a political operative, not an ethics board. And this, she held up another page, is internal communication confirming it was leaked directly to media before our team was ever notified. The camera zoomed slightly. The studio was quiet now, eerily so. You want transparency? Pam continued. You're looking at it. You just didn't expect it to be aimed back at you. Karoline leaned forward, locking eyes with the host. You've spent months letting others tell our story. Today we're telling it ourselves, and in that moment it was clear. They hadn't come to play defense. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was seismic. The host's practiced charm flickered for a moment, like a stage light shorting out mid-performance. He reached for his water glass, hands just steady enough to avoid revealing the shift in the room. But the damage was done. Karoline leaned back slightly, but her gaze never left the host. Tell me, she asked softly, how does it feel to realize you're not the one asking the questions anymore? It wasn't a jab. It was a mirror. And everyone watching knew it. Pam slid another document onto the desk. Since we're talking about ethics, she said, her tone almost casual, let's talk about the federal grant that mysteriously rerouted after a closed-door meeting involving your favorite senator and a lobbyist from your parent company's board. You aired a story on it last month, without ever disclosing the conflict. The host opened his mouth, but no words came out. Karoline continued, her voice like velvet over steel. You've painted us as radicals, as threats, but what's really radical is pretending the public doesn't deserve better than stage-managed narratives and political theater. And what's truly dangerous, Pam added, is mistaking politeness for weakness. We came here because we believed this platform could handle honesty. If that was a mistake, we'll let your viewers decide. The host glanced off camera, likely looking for a lifeline. But none came because in that moment everyone knew. This interview wasn't about saving face anymore. It was about who still had one left to save. The production team scrambled behind the scenes, cutting to wide shots, lowering audio levels, even dimming the lights ever so slightly, as if shadows could soften what had just unfolded. But nothing could dim the weight of the truth hanging in that studio. Karoline adjusted her mic, calm as ever. There's a reason people don't trust institutions anymore, she said, eyes locked on the camera now. Not the host, not the room, but the millions watching from living rooms, hospital waiting rooms, lunch breaks, and late-night doom-scrolling sessions. Because those who claim to speak truth rarely pay the price when they lie. Pam nodded, gently sliding her chair forward. You framed this as accountability, she added. But it wasn't. This was an ambush, a performance. What you didn't count on was that we came armed with receipts. She tapped the folder once, an almost theatrical gesture if not for the mountain of documentation inside it. The host attempted a redirect, voice shaky. But surely you can see why some might question... Question what? Karoline cut in, still razor-sharp. Why we fight for the people who can't buy airtime? Why we answer questions instead of scripting them? Or is the real issue that women with conviction are harder to spin? The question hung in the air. The camera angle tightened as if to regain control, but all it did was focus the viewers more closely on two women who refused to be framed. Pam looked back to the host, voice softer, but no less clear. You wanted a headline. You got one. But make sure it tells the whole story. And with that, the balance of power in the room flipped for good. The network producers were in full-blown damage control mode. In the control room upstairs, someone barked into a headset, "Cut to commercial. Now." But the tech hesitated, his eyes glued to the screen like everyone else. No one had expected this. The two women who were supposed to be cornered had just rewritten the script live. Down in the studio, the silence wasn't just awkward. It was reverent. Pam Bondi didn't flinch. Karoline Leavitt didn't blink. They had turned what was meant to be a trial by media into something else entirely. Something bigger. The host, struggling to regain any semblance of control, shuffled through his notes. Let's stay on topic, he muttered, flipping pages that suddenly felt weightless. This was supposed to be about oversight, not... Pam leaned forward slightly, never raising her voice. "It is about oversight," she said. "Yours." The room seemed to shrink. That one word carried more force than a dozen shouting matches. No grandstanding, no raised voices, just precision, and that's what shook everyone the most. Karoline followed with a tone so calm it cut sharper than any outburst. "The American people aren't stupid. They're not tuning in for theater. They're desperate for truth, and they can smell manufactured outrage from a mile away. You think you're shaping public opinion? You're underestimating how awake the public actually is." The host smiled, an awkward twitch, more muscle memory than confidence. "You talk about truth," he said, grasping for footing. "But let's not pretend either of you are above politics." Pam nodded. "Of course not, but there's a difference between having convictions and selling narratives for ratings." She gestured toward the glowing logo behind the host's chair. "You've turned debate into clickbait. And when real people come here, people who've lost trust in their systems, you use them to farm outrage and call it journalism." A producer's voice buzzed into the host's earpiece. He blinked. Then the message became clear. "Wrap it. Hard cut. End the segment." He looked back at the women. "We're out of time," he said with a strained grin, but Pam wasn't finished. "Time's not the issue," she replied. "It's truth. You ran out of that long before we sat down." Karoline stood. "Let the record show. We didn't walk into this studio for applause. We came here because somewhere along the line this show forgot who it was serving." And with that they walked off. Not stormed, not flustered. Walked controlled, steady, while the host stared down at his notes like they might rearrange themselves into a better ending, but they wouldn't, because the ending had already been written, and it wasn't his. The clip of Pam Bondi and Karoline Leavitt walking off that set hit the internet like a spark to dry timber. No dramatic music, no flashing headlines, just the raw footage, two women refusing to play along. Within minutes, the comments rolled in like a tide. They didn't argue, they dismantled him. I've never seen a host look that nervous before. This wasn't a debate. This was a reckoning. It was the kind of moment that didn't need to be explained. People felt it. By the next morning, millions had already watched. Political influencers, legal analysts, even former White House staffers were weighing in. One post summed it up perfectly. Pam Bondi brought the facts. Karoline brought the fire. The host brought nothing. But behind the scenes, the fallout was even more telling. Producers at the network held emergency meetings. Ratings had spiked, but not for the reason they'd hoped. This wasn't the controlled gotcha narrative they were used to spinning. The guests hadn't melted down. They had taken control, and the viewers had loved it. More worrying for the network was what came next, the transcript leak. An anonymous staffer, frustrated, maybe even inspired, shared the host's pre-show notes online. Pages of talking points designed not to interview, but to corner. Lists of assumptions, manipulative questions, bullet points like, "Push Bondi on Christian nationalism. Frame Karoline as a far-right puppet. Interrupt if they mention government overreach." Suddenly, the ambush was no longer speculation. It was documented. Karoline posted one sentence to her account. "This is what they call journalism?" Pam shared a photo of her notepad from the show. It had one word scribbled at the top in red ink. Calm. The contrast was striking. One side had come prepared to provoke. The other came prepared to reveal. And now, both women had unintentionally done more than expose a biased host. They had pulled the curtain back on an entire system of narrative control. Over the following days, media segments began referencing what they called the Bondi-Leavitt exchange. Not a confrontation, not a takedown, an exchange. It became a case study. What happens when two people refuse to fight fire with fire and instead bring water? Professors discussed it in political communication classes. Editorials debated whether media ethics had finally been cornered in real time. One columnist wrote, "For years, we've watched public figures crumble under the weight of hostile interviews. But Pam and Karoline, they didn't crumble, they clarified." Back inside that studio, empty now, the lights off, the chair where the host had sat looked oddly small, powerless, because for the first time the narrative hadn't belonged to him. And the most remarkable part, neither of the women raised their voices. They didn't accuse, they didn't insult, they just spoke clearly, calmly, without apology. That's what people remembered. That's what couldn't be edited out. The clip of the interview had reached 10 million views by Thursday night, but the moment that truly broke the internet wasn't what Pam or Karoline said during the interview. It was what happened 3 days later. A university professor from Columbia Law tweeted, "I'm showing the Bondi Leavitt interview in my media ethics class tomorrow. Not because they won, but because they exposed the game." The tweet went viral, and with it a new conversation began. Because this wasn't just two women refusing to be cornered on a talk show, this was two women turning a setup into a spotlight. And now, everyone was staring at what they had revealed. By Friday morning, 3 former producers from the same network anonymously confirmed, "That host has been doing this for years. Every tough guest gets the same script. This time it just didn't work." The network scrambled. Public relations spun the story as passionate debate gone wrong. But it was too late. The transcript had already been dissected. The manipulation wasn't just suspected, it was printed, bolded, highlighted. Bondi's lines were being turned into graphics. Karoline's closing remarks were being printed on T-shirts. Even late-night comedians, normally hostile to their politics, admitted on air. They walked in, kept their cool, and left the whole set smoldering. But it wasn't the praise that made this moment powerful. It was the realization that truth, when spoken with precision and calm, could cut through a wall of noise. Pam Bondi, once known only as a sharp legal mind, had now become a symbol of composure under fire. Karoline Leavitt, once dismissed by critics as too young to matter, had just silenced a professional manipulator with nothing but logic and unwavering clarity. But even that wasn't the end. The real twist. A young intern from the network reached out privately to Karoline. In her message, she wrote, "I've sat in the control room for over a year. I know what they tried to do. I just want you to know. We all watched what happened, and some of us, it changed how we see the job." That was it. Not headlines, not ratings, not debate panels, but one message, one shift, a small crack in a machine that had spun for too long without consequence. Pam read the message. She sent back 4 words. "Truth doesn't need volume." And maybe that's what this moment was about. Not just winning an argument, not humiliating a biased host, not trending on social media, but reminding a nation that you don't have to yell to be heard, you just have to be right. And when you speak with clarity, calm, and purpose, no matter the setup, no matter the trap, even a rigged system starts to shake. So if you watched this moment and thought, they were different, you're not wrong. They were, because they didn't play the game. They rewrote it. And the next time someone thinks they can script the story, they'll remember what happened when 2 women sat down, refused the role, and walked out having flipped the narrative for good, because silence can be scripted. But truth writes itself. If this story shook you even just a little, don't scroll past it. What you just witnessed wasn't fiction. It was a reminder that power, when left unchecked, can twist the truth, and that standing up isn't just brave, it's necessary. We're not here to make noise, we're here to cut through it. Every week we bring you real stories, some hidden, some silenced, all worth hearing. If you believe accountability still matters, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button, because next time it might not be a courtroom, it might be your world, and you'll want to be ready.